Let's start with sentiment in markets and the price action, because we look at a futures picture for Europe, looks kind of flat to negative. US futures down quite a bit, 0.6% lower on E-minis. Doesn't seem as if we found, well, JP Morgan's talking about the floor being in for US stocks. Doesn't seem as if we found it just yet.
No, it's really notable how poor the price action is across all assets. We've seen some quite incredible moves in the last couple of weeks, not just on the US stock side, but what we've also seen on the yield side, what we've seen on the currency side, what we've seen, we're not seeing that pullback, for example, in euro dollar, even the short term. So really the price action right now is that, yes, these moves have gone a long way very quickly, but there's no kind of real relief bounce, which means I don't know whether we've had that complete capitulation yet. It doesn't feel like a market that feels fresh enough to buy the dip. So I am worried by people who think we've already seen the worst of the correction so far. To me, it seems like even in the short term, as in even in the next week or two, we're probably going to have some more negativity. And that's why I think people are ascribing some of that negativity to the government shutdown, even though I don't think that's really that big a story. I think that's like a narrative to fit the price action. I think retail sales on Monday is important. I think we've got the Fed coming up. So I think there's a number of catalysts that might get us one more washout, it seems, before we can get a bit more of a dip buying.
You had your macro dinner last night.
Yeah.
Consensus? No consensus.
No consensus.
So what does that tell us about where we are in this market? There seems to be a hot debate about everything at the moment. Do we need to see one kind of area of resolution before we can start to see the bounce that maybe you're talking about coming later down the road? At some point, the stars are all going to align. I'm just kind of... Is there a sense of where they start to align first?
No, I think not, because I think the problem is so many of these issues are not going to be quickly resolved. So obviously, Europe's quite a big story, for example, but does Europe have the fiscal room to really kind of follow through, and when do we see the impact? Some people who believe that the story is more important than when we see the fundamentals. I'm in that camp. I think the paradigm shift has happened for Europe, but there's certainly debate there. Other people still debating about, how impactful tariffs will actually be, and whether, a few months from now, whether the average effective rate of tariffs in the US will actually be significantly higher. Then other people there's a massive divide of how much the Fed responds to the some of the slowdown we're seeing. So I think none of these issues are going to be quickly resolved. I mean, the Fed will probably be the first one we get a bit of a signal on, but I don't think that's enough. And then there's the real debate about how much is the economy actually slowing, and then probably maybe the most important for that, whether we get a US economic recession, is how much fiscal retrenchment are we actually going to get? And there's a lot of people who are pretty cynical that there'll really be much cutting back. Some people even think there'll eventually be fiscal expansion this year, which means you're never going to get a technical recession. So it's very much debate out there still.
So what's the hedge with all of that? Are people just storing cartons of eggs in their basements, or are they doing Bitcoin? Eggs are the inflation hedge, aren't they?
It's interesting you say. I mean, it's certainly there's still a very strong passion for gold, which we know has performed so well recently. People are talking about what the other havens are out there. What I found was interesting is that that there was no consensus. Like normally I come away from these things and you're like, oh, most of the room was very much one way or the other, and certainly on every issue there might have been a slight majority, but people had high conviction just in opposite directions. It wasn't like, oh no. It was like, no, I strongly believe this. No, I strongly believe the exact opposite. So I think it's still a really vibrant trading market. There's still a lot of opportunities out there. I'm in the camp that we are seeing a paradigm shift in Europe, and therefore bigger retrenchment in other assets.
So no eggs for Mark is what I got out of that.
Not a gold, maybe.
But
I don't like sardines, I'm sorry.
I think you're in the consensus there, Mark.